In this tutorial, we're going to give you a few simple rules and simple methods to make a basic old school pretty base. We're then going to level it up with some new school additives, which are wonderful stick-on, literally like stickers almost. They just happen to be three-dimensional, and things that you can use to really, really level it up. I've gone for a jungle base in this one, worked out really well. I use some particular things that kind of help with that. You can make like plains, a wasteland or something like that. Everything you need is in this tutorial. It should be really beginner friendly. We're going to use a small selection of products. Any of them that are harder to find, I'll make sure that I've linked below. Anyway, let's jump in and let's have a little look at how much of a difference good quality basing can make to a miniature. So here we have a successfully based miniature. Now, essentially this is pretty flat actually. I've just stuck a load of stuff to the top of it, literally stuck more on those tufts and fancy things later like the flowers. The base looked like this beforehand though. Very, very simple. It's got two aspects. It's got sand, it's got small bits of slate, and they've both been glued down with PVA. That is it. So that's all was on this base underneath. Now, just hopping quickly to this one. On this, I built up a little bit more height. That's done with the same stuff. I just picked some areas and went over them twice. Really, really, really simple. There's one key error here on this one, which looks really unrealistic. I'll cover that in a second, but let's go ahead and start a base. Okay, so all I have here is a tub with some bits in it. That's mostly stone, slate, stuff like that. You can get this from hobby shops. If you get it from hobby shops, it's been cleaned. If you get it from Builder's Yard or Gardening Centre or something like that, it hasn't. So yeah, there's that information. Sand though, I'm specifically using a hobby sand. This is GW's one. You could use someone else's. It tends to be slightly more consistent. You can go to pet shops and get specific sands of specific sizes. And if it's in a pet shop, it's been cleaned as well. You just end up with it being a bit less dusty, and they can be incredibly dusty, especially if you get them from a builder's yard because they don't care about dust. All right, we have all the accessories we could possibly need. You'll notice I've got some sticks in there and some other bits and bobs. We're just gonna make a simple one though. PVA glue, I'm using an old thick one. I actually prefer thick ones, and I'm gonna use an old brush to apply it. This won't kill your brush. That's kind of a common misconception. It'll kill your brush if you leave it on your brush and then don't clean it again afterwards. But you know, it's pretty easy to clean your brush process. So to start with, you can either squidge it on or blob it on like I am. I'm just going to spread it around. Now the most important bit, the easiest bit to get wrong is the edge of the base. So what I do is I work it close to the edge, not going over it. That's really important, but there's a very, very easy way to fix that. You're going to go up to the very, very, very edge. The glue will shrink away from it, so this is why the last thing that you need to do is to kind of make sure that all of your edges looking like everything has been reached. And if you've gone over anywhere like I did there, straight around with the finger. Working swiftly, we're going to drop a couple of larger bits of slate on. Do it in little piles if you want. Do it in areas where the glue's thick and it'll hold onto it nicely. If you've got any bits that land edge down rather than flat down, they won't stick very strongly. So thanks, Manchester. I tend to specifically try and drop them down flat side down. With that done, quickly go to my sand, I'm going to shake it. All the big stuff will rise to the top. I want the smaller stuff, so what I'm going to do is get it and just push it into it, and then I'm going to put my sand on top. Really important tip, I'm just going to leave that there. So as the sand kind of sticks to the PVA is going to soak through it, and the PVA will rise upwards, especially if you're using really wet PVA. As it does that, it's just going to go to the top and look wet, not sandy. We're going for a sandy look, so this way, when it rises through, there'll be more sand just to sit there. So I'll leave that for like 5 minutes and we'll come back. While it's drying, I'm going to cover a couple of things. This model here has just actually been pressed in. I can probably pop him out, but it might screw up some of the plants. He's just been squeezed in here. So I painted his base separately and then popped him in. If you can't avoid your model being on your base, that's fine. That's actually probably the normal way to do things. It's just way easier if you can paint an entire flat thing and then glue your guy on top of it. Do make sure that you bear in mind, you know, cloaks or things like that. And what I tend to do is practice with my model on the base, press its feet into it. Then you can just glue them there lightly, glue all around it with a PVA and then snap it up if you've used super glue or something like that. And your model can just be kind of socketed back where he was once the base is painted. Other bases like the plastic Sector Mechanicus ones, they're brilliant because they're just always fairly easy to glue models to, and you can pin them to them as well. All right, a few minutes have passed. I've actually been a little bit impatient here. Take it out by the underneath, not by pressing on the sides, because this isn't fully dry yet. And then what I'm going to do is anywhere where there's stuff on the edge, this is like #1 cause of beginner looking basing, is sand on the edge of your base. there is no excuse. Just rub it off. And you get some areas where you've had quite a lot kind of close to the edge of your base, like that. Same again. Carefully knock it down. You don't want to go over onto the top, but get the edges at the very least. If anywhere's sticking out like that and you touch it in gaming or painting, it's just going to get knocked off anyway. So you're kind of avoiding future kind of delicacy or falling apart issues by scraping it off the edges. Okay, there we go. That is a start. I want more texture on this. The ground is not that flat. That's like rule of flat. There's a really simple way to fix this. We just do what we've done already, do it again. So I'd avoid the edges for this stuff. You can take it close to them. And one thing that I like to do is kind of around rocks and stuff like that, try and build up a mound anyway. It tends to be that in nature you'd get larger clumps next to shelter, and that's also where grass is more likely to grow out of as well. So I'll be bearing that in mind when I put my tufts down. It's not fully dried yet, so I'm being quite careful with the application. If I was more patient or I was doing a lot at once, then it'd be fully dried and I'd have nothing to worry about here. Try and be random with the patterning of it, but don't worry if anything doesn't look great. You can just kind of hide it with future processes. More on that coming up. If you want to kind of fade it out, you can just dab a little bit of water around the edges. I'll show you that with this big blob that I'm doing here. Bit of water on the brush. Obviously, guys, this is an ancient, very tired brush I'm using. Before people tell me that I'm ruining it, it's an early retirement right now. I'm going to choose a big rock for this. Nice. Then we're just going to do exactly what we've already done before again. Do hold in mind that if you're doing 10 of these at once, this is a pretty efficient process. Okay, so let's have a little look. After stage 2, I've given this ample drying time, by the way, so the bottom layer that wasn't quite dry, that we were being careful of, that shouldn't be a worry. Just tap off the excess. There we go, so it doesn't look like much, but those little patches will be slightly higher. I'm going to quickly just repeat that. Of course, if you're doing this over multiple bases, if you have more steps added in, it barely adds any time, especially if it's literally as casual as blobbing on paint and pressing it under something on a fully dried base that you don't have to be delicate with. The only thing I'll make sure with the second application is not to do anything wrong around the stones. I think we've kind of worked towards them in a good way so far. We'll exaggerate that and we'll be good to go with the painting. One thing you can do, by the way, if you're worried about loose bits, just gently go over them. People would worry this is bad for the brush, but anyone saying that is forgetting this is literally how you dry brush anyway. So yeah, if this was bad for the brush, we wouldn't be able to use our brushes. If you have forgotten to clean your brushes afterwards, just leave them in water for a little bit. And by that, I mean, soak them completely and then leave them, not head down, because this will happen. Leave them to soak, work it in. PVA is water soluble. We'll touch on more on that shortly, but that should start breaking it down, and then just give it a little bit of attention with some brush soap. They'll come back to life absolutely fine. You could also use airbrush in it if you wanted. You can of course put more slate or other details on now if you want. Just bear in mind how things would kind of behave in nature. Your sand shouldn't go higher than your objects, basically. If you had an object, it'd be kind of nestled in it. So just think about, you know, things piling up in nature. Just go and Google real life examples if ever in doubt. Probably one of the best tips with basing. So here, where I've gone onto that rock by accident, sand would just not work its way up. So what we can do, take a brush and just gently nudge that down, and we can also clean it off when it's dry. Just to show you my brush. So basically it's only had water, haven't even soaped it yet, and just through use, the PVA, as I've said, because it's water soluble, it's been reactivated, reawakened, and actually using it with PVA on the base has kind of agitated things, and we're almost where we started, even if it is a very old and shabby brush. It's so old that its I'm old mark is nearly worn off. All right, final time. I won't say I promise, just in case it isn't. So I actually took the opportunity to fix that base I showed you, which had bad bulgy sand on. That happens when you press into a detail, the PVA bulges up and then you get unrealistic clumping. As far as unrealistic clumping goes, I tried to build up to this one so I can show you. We just got some little bits on the end there. There we go. I know it's small, but it does really make a difference. So I'm gonna leave this to dry. Once it's dry, I'm going to lock it. You need to lock your sand, and you can do that one of two ways. You can water down PVA and put it on, or you can spray it with a spray varnish. It doesn't particularly matter which one. Don't use it too heavy, but yeah, just give it a spray, and that'll make sure that anything we do afterwards doesn't reactivate it. If you're using watered down PVA, it's on PVA. PVA is water soluble, so you have to be quite careful. Don't be too rough with it, because you might dissolve the PVA that's on there while you're working before it's had a chance to dry. You might move things around, so do take care. Again, this little bit here, you could just use a brush for this, but mine's partially dried, so I'll scrape it off with this. Just pushing it off my edges like we pushed it off the edges of the base. So your miniature's base is the world that you set it in, and I cannot overstate how important it is to put your miniature in a world. Think about where it would be from, think about the plants that would grow there, think about the, rocks or skulls, plenty of skulls of course, stuff like that would be on the ground around it. Even if you want to go basic, you can always stick a couple of things on quickly afterwards that are really going to make a difference. One other thing that will make a huge difference that we always do on the channel is taking the miniature's base up its feet. So unless it is on like a metal sci-fi, like Citadel's pre-made plastic bases, whatever it's standing in, if it's mud, if it's blood, if it's dust, it's going to work its way up the legs of the miniature, and that makes a colossal difference instantly to how your miniature looks. It's also a really good opportunity to get some kind of contrast in there. Let's pop up our Black Templar, which was kind of slightly glossy, deep blue black. We had some matte reddy brown coming up his feet from the base it was on. Perfect. We've done it with Space Marines. Similarly, I really like Mars coloured basing. You'll probably notice that as a theme. But yeah, working your miniature's base up the feet is a really brilliant way to tie it in, and you're tying it into the world that you've set it in, which is so important. The moment you have multiple miniatures, it's really important because there's more ground there. And if you have one miniature and you're looking closely at it, it's just as important. So never skimp on the basing. If you have a average quality miniature on high quality basing, from far away, that's going to look like a high quality miniature. If you have a high quality miniature on average basing, from any distance, that's going to look like a miniature on an average base. So it's definitely worth spending the time there. Also, it's just really hard to screw up basing. It's fun, it's relaxing, you can kind of chill out doing it, and there's a load of products that just make it kind of easy. Anyway, let's jump in. Apologies if there's some background sounds. We have had some respite from the ravages of hay fever. My voice isn't too bad, but there's still a little bit of background noise. I've closed all the doors as much as I can, but yeah, we'll do our best. Anyway, we are going to approach our very first base, in theory, with a couple of simple ways to do it. One of them seems more scary than the other. It's not. It's actually way more easy. I'm going to show you the conventional way first quickly, and then we'll go to my preferred way now, which is how I pretty much do every base on an army level actually these days. So let's jump into the conventional way and keep it very, very simple. I use 3 paints and 1 wash. Some black, plenty of word bearers red. If you don't have word bearers red, you can mix Mephiston red or any dark red and black, and you'll basically get a pretty much identical color. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I want to make sure that all of this is base coated and get a really good amount mixed up ready of a very dark version of this brown. Plenty of water is fine here, or help it go into the cracks, and we're probably going to need 2 coats of this. Get it over the edges of your base, not with great big drifts. You want it to go further than the sand for reasons that will become very clear when we try and make things look clean and pretty at the end. You could see this as almost, if you've got a dark color to start with, you could see this as almost filling the gaps that your spray missed. I'm already missing my normal way of doing things. That will be revealed soon, and it's such a fun way to paint. Not worrying too much about the rocks because I'm going to hit them with something else, but there we go, let it dry. Okay, with that down, we've filled in all gaps. There's no nasty shadowed bits that are a light sand color. So I'm just going to use pretty much pure word bearers. You could use a brown that covers better than this, but sometimes you don't have the color that you want in a heavy coverage version. So let's show you what it's like when you don't. Putting paint down this thick, which is kind of acceptable for basing, especially on an army level, you're probably going to nearly get 1 coat coverage, whatever you do anyway. But 2 coats is generally advisable. Again, we're going up to and over the edges of our band. Here, the band that goes all the way around the side, you want to be on that and over it by enough to be safe. I lied about the number of paints we use, so now I feel obliged to mix up my grey instead of use a grey. You could use a grey though if you wanted. I'll just mix one up using the Screaming Skull and the black that we've already got. So having base coated the brown, I'm just going to block in our rocks. Anything with black in it tends to base coat kind of well as a default. So if you've got a grey that isn't working brilliantly, weirdly you can add a little bit of black to it, and then if you want to make it the colour it was, you can add a little bit of white and you'll end up with something close. But the moment you've popped black in any paint, if it's a solid black, and this is a good black, it's for layers, it's really good for coverage. Now, if anything isn't perfectly neat, I really wouldn't worry about it with army level basing. It just doesn't matter. The moment you've done a wash or a dry brush or both, and we're going to do both, it'll tie things together, and the ground isn't perfectly, uniform anyway. In fact, if you end up with things too neat, I think it can look a little bit odd and CGI'd. So there we go, blocked in. Now for the fun and fast stages. And then we get to do tufts, and everyone wants to do tufts. Okay, now I'm going to explain quickly, hold with me. I know people don't like sequencing discussions, but this is important stuff and it's very simple. You can do the wash now and darken everything down and then bring it up. You'll make stuff look a little bit more dry, probably, doing the dry brushing at the end. If you do your wash at the end, you'll bring everything down, including your highlights. It'll make it a little bit darker and it'll probably unify it a little bit. One's not better, one's not worse, they're just different things. I'm going to do my dry brushing now, and then I'll be using my wash at the end to kind of unify stuff. So you'll get to see an example of what that looks like. I think probably people are used to doing the wash at the beginning, and I think I'm done with washing, I'm not going to do any more of that. I completely disagree. I really like doing it like this. So I'm going to take a little bit of our bone carefully. A little bit of brown. So your first coat doesn't need to achieve a huge amount, but you should make sure that you get pretty much everywhere. Try and avoid the rocks slightly, but actually getting them is not the end of the world. Don't aim for them, but you don't really have to worry about avoiding them particularly. So even if you don't feel this is achieving much, it's still going to lay a foundation for the next step. And what it's going to do is it's going to basically mean that your next step, you can be a little bit more lax with, and it won't matter too much. So we've got a lighter stage now. What you'll notice is as you add a higher portion of the white in, your stages will affect your base increasingly easily. You can do as many as you want. Each of them takes like 5 seconds on the model and some setup time, so it's very, very, very fast. I jump right to a very light one now, and that'll be my last one. New place on the palette, I don't need to go and involve any of the old paint, it'll mix in the brush a bit anyway. Now this one, because it's much closer to pretty much pure bony, very light bony brown, I'm fine without hitting the rocks. So I'm going to highlight the rocks with the same step. You could use a clean brush if you wanted, but I don't think it matters too much. Maybe I could go one lighter quickly. Bit more on my brush, I'll use lighter pressure. Give it a final kind of end stroke. This one looks particularly good on the grey, so I'll gently buff that up. And then when you're more confident with it, nothing's exploding, nothing's gone wrong, we're all good. So there we go. The bits that are higher up, I'm going to dry brush them more. I want them to look lighter. All right, there we go. Unifying wash time. After cleaning our brush, because we're going to be good. And I have to use this for the next base anyway, so I'll be punished if I don't use this. All right, general rule of thumb. Take any wash you like that is darker than your base coat was. This one's black, so it's definitely darker. Pop some down, and then take a little bit of whatever your base coat involved. So I could take some of the brown, could take some of the black as well if I wanted. I can take a little bit of the brown, and mix that in. There is your color. Make sure you make enough of it, especially if you're doing this on an army level. You'll probably need quite a lot more than you think. Do a little test on whether it doesn't matter. We're fine. Anything three-dimensional, you just need more than you think. This is why your washes and your contrasts are the only paints that you generally run out of. Occasionally you might run out of your favorite silver or black or white or red, the heavily used colors, but washes you just use so much quicker. So this is gonna pull together the base really nicely. You could absolutely take blobs of other washes like greens or purples, greens work really well because you see them in the organic world a lot, and just blob them down within this. there's no downside to that. You're going to get a wet blend. You'll have a really nice transition between the two colours and it won't go wrong. I can show you that on the next one. Pop those bubbles. There we go. Let it dry thoroughly. I actually want to pop this a little bit, so I'm going to repeat my last dry brush step. There you go. So I know that may seem counterintuitive to have washed it and then to dry brush it again, but one takes care of the recesses, one takes care of the raised areas. And I think our base looks pretty natural now. Bit of variation in there, some depth. Let's get on to the fun bit. So before we are rewarded with the joy of tufts, which is literally one of the best things in the entire hobby, I'm just going to run the base carefully. Now how I do that, you can run along it carefully like this, or you can take your brush facing upwards, whichever you're more comfortable with. And what I'm going to do is aim to go to just the very top and no further. I do this in 2 passes. Your black will cover quite fast, but don't try and get it in one go. It's probably what leads to the most mistakes. And a nice crisp black rim is irreplaceable in this hobby. Any colour's fine as long as it's black. Now if you want a matte black rim, you can use matte blacks like Vallejo's or a lot of other brands. I actually think GW's Abaddon gives a really nice kind of slightly satiny finish, so even if I do my first stage with another brand, I tend to finish off with a Citadel black. People say bad things about Abaddon, but I really like it for mixes because it's soft, and I actually really like its finish for base rims. When you sacrifice in coverage, you make up for with some other stuff. Hopefully we've got little to no sand trickling over the edge. All right, there we go. Crisp, battle-ready basing, and we haven't even put tufts on it. Okay, this is what I mean by tufts. So if you're new to the idea of these are pre-made little clumps of foliage, normally natural world stuff. You can get some kind of zany, alien-y ones. You can even now get little tiny pre-printed paper plants which you can fold, and I would actually recommend washing these and painting these. I've used some of these already. They're pretty cool. Yeah, there's a huge variety. I would encourage you to get a couple and mix them up. In nature, plants are going to be different heights or colors. A couple of rules of thumb to follow are, if something is in shelter, it will probably be greener, especially if you're doing like a sparse plains or something like that. If stuff's in the shelter of a rock, where moisture is, it'll be more protected. It might be, you know, longer and greener and maybe flowering. I would be absolutely willing to pull your tufts to bits. I'll show you more on that pretty much immediately. Okay, so I'll take some baby ones. These are little short ones. Sometimes they'll have different millimeters listed on them. 6 millimeters is actually quite long. 4 is quite small. Generally, it will be somewhere between those two. I'll pop a link to these below for people who are interested. Okay, here's our tuft. They are self-adhesive. This is basically the static grass that's been in the hobby for forever, but people have made it into little things for us with everything pointing upwards. You can take it off. They're quite tough. They do tend to be a little bit fluffy on the edges. Sometimes you might want to fiddle around with them or sort out some bits they've got on there. You can absolutely cut through these easily. If they're shorter, it's a bit easier. If they're longer, they're a bit more tricky. So we'll take a short one now. Easiest way is to just pop it down on the desk. Take your knife, push it into it from the side, not the top. The side, parting the grass until it's at the base of the knife, not the tip. There we go. Now, obviously nature's not full of sharp edges, but if you have a detail that you want to knock things up to, I could have cut a triangle in and be fitting it under this. You'd be surprised how often that happens. Also, models get in the way. So if you want to have something that fits around your model's feet, this is really, really useful. All right, I'm going to have a little bit of fun, just arrange these however I see fit, and I'll pop on a time lapse and get these sorted. If for any reason your surface is, your stuff's not sticking to it, you can use super glue or PVA. Super glue is better if you're being impatient. PVA is a better bond, up to you. But they will go down there. I tend to do kind of a dry fit, work out where everything's going, and then one at a time I'll just put some PVA or super glue on my palette and I'll take them off. I'm often using my knife for this. Tweezers are better though. Dip it in, press it down carefully, press it down fully, and let it dry. Okay, let's pop on a bit of a time lapse and I'll get this guy sorted. All right, and we're done. So obviously that looks incredible in comparison to just a fairly standard base that we had before. I've used the lavender effect ones, a little bit happy, maybe for a wartime base, but definitely looks pretty realistic. And there is an instant kind of recognition when you look at something like that, that you've seen stuff like that in nature before. So that's really powerful. What if you want to do something a little bit more funky and maybe even speed it up? So let's jump in. I'll largely use the same colors to give you a good comparison, but I might mix in some others. Right, so what we're going to do is we're going to mix our first 2 or 3 stages together with this one. My aim is to put down a very quick, heavily diluted but strong coat first, and we are relying on that having not dried by the time we return to it, so that's quite important. As it's so dilute, there's not anything that's going to go wrong here. We're not going to obscure details or anything like that. What we can do actually is we can start what we were talking about now. I'm going to start using different colors all over this base, and it's not going to matter. So these are just going to wet blend into each other. You don't need to be concerned about things not looking right. It's the ground. The ground's often a mess. And even if you put them on neat, you can go back in with water. So there's some neat paint. Here's some water and a dirty brush. It just doesn't matter. So quickly now, we're going to add in some areas of variation, some areas that are different base coats. And we don't need to worry about coherency or whether this matches that, because it is the ground, and the ground often doesn't match. We could even bring in some of our additional highlight colors. Obviously the wood's probably going to be a different color anyway, but we don't have to worry about that because this is the base coat for the wood. In essence, and to repeat myself again, don't worry, it's going to be fine. This is kind of like airbrushing. All right, we've got a highlight color that's due, so why not mix a little bit of that in? You could do the same with the green. I could get a ridiculously bright green and use it in the same way here. Let's prove a point. Especially once it's mixed in with browns or whatever, it just won't matter. Camo yourself a base. This could be moss, it could be anything. Really, really nice way to do bases. And very, very similar to airbrushing as well. That's it, just let it dry. If you do put down any bits that are too harsh or too thick, just get a wet brush and poke away at the edges and it'll kind of blend with what's next to it. You do need to, however, I've forgotten, make sure you go up to and over your edges. Cool. Base coats wise, I'm just going to do the same, but with different colors for the rocks or the wood or whatever. It's a really quick way to get natural variation in. And natural variation in nature is one of the best things to be able to kind of replicate. So if we can do it like this, whilst going even faster than we would be normally, that's a great bonus. Last kind of final run. Brighten some upwards facing bits or edges. Cool. Next stage is very similar to our previous base. You could go slower, you could do more variation. We're going to keep it fairly fast though. As with the previous one, the moment you add the lighter color, you'll find yourself affecting the model a lot faster, a lot more easily. So don't rush when you've added the bone or the lighter highlight color in for the dry brushing. Hit that piece of wood more heavily. I'm going to paint it lighter than the rest of it. Dry brushing in slate, winning combo since 1980. Make sure you go up to the edges, as with all your stages. There we go. So I looked at my base and realized that I dry brushed all of it in like the same direction. So I'm quickly going to go over it and highlight it in circles. It's very, it's less complicated than it sounds. I'm just going to do this. You could tell that I dry brushed it from one direction. So just going to fix that. And while I'm here, I'll add a little bit of white for the rocks. Maybe hit that tree a tiny bit. Cool. I'm going to use a soft wash on this one, and I'm going to use 2 different washes. I use sepia for the ground with a little bit of our Doombull mixed in. It's fine for this to get slightly up the rocks, especially at the bottoms. And then what I'm going to do is, to make sure that I've not gone too heavy, I'm just going to take water and take what I've got on it and use it to spread it around elsewhere. That'll also increase natural variation because there'll be more in some parts and less in others. You can always brush it off somewhere if you don't want it there, or put it in somewhere in a controlled manner. Up to you. Like we saw on the basing, if you want to bring anywhere up or add something to an area, you absolutely can. Either is fine. Hopefully this is blowing some people's minds. Basing's wonderful, you don't have to worry. It's so easy and it's so free and loose. And then we can take that colour we've mixed up and we can get a bit of green going on our rocks. So easy, as much or as little as you want. Very, very hard to go wrong with this stuff. That looks great. That green's mixed in really nice. Cool. Tough. So, been having plenty of fun, but important things to note. They're tougher than they look actually. This is how your plants do look, not great, and this is how your plants could look. Brilliant. So you've got a little piece of cardboard in here. I've got it popped in my little inspiration holder that I've always got at the back of me when I'm painting. This little thing that holds some paint pots in it as well. Have a look at nature, have a look at references. You can put brown ones with brown ones. They've got different colours in there. Maybe brown ones would be curled in a different way, which these guys have actually neglected to do. Brown ones are going to be dead. They'll be probably curled over like this at the ends, and then a live one should be all open and spready and beautiful like this. They've done all of theirs in the same way. Use stuff like this. It really, really, really helps. They've literally got a nature reference photo for you there. So I'm going to be doing that. And I have sat one inside another, and this is what we've ended up with. You can't break them because they just bend, which is really good, really. So I'm just going to pop this in some super glue, and then we're going to arrange it, ideally like in and around our other stuff. Yeah, get in your hole. Might need to pop a little bit of glue in there. That's great though, isn't it? Just so helpful. Yeah, I'm gonna fill my boots and cover this in other stuff, and hopefully we end up with a really like Jurassic Parky, jungly looking base. By the way, technique for curling is way easier than for bending them in the middle. For bending them in the middle, I'll take them like this and then kind of press down with something that's sharp but not too sharp. And it'll cause the edges to curl upwards. For curling, far easier. Take it and then just keep rolling it around. You want to tuck that end in. And once you tuck the end in, there you go. And at the end, all you have to do is bend the stalk down. There is an important painting step coming because they have white edges. It's very easily fixed though. Okay, so your secret trick is extremely easy for these leaves. It's not something you need to worry about damaging them or whatever. It's just using washes or contrast, particularly with those edges in mind. So I'm going to grab, I've got a drab here one. I've got a drab one here. Mantis Warrior's green. Test how strong it is first. Of course, you can make the dead ones look more dead or the alive ones look more alive by putting it all over. But our main goal here is just to make sure that we hit the edges. Obviously avoid any excess pooling. These little white edges we've got fixed in one go. Like I say, if you want to make them look more alive or more dead, then you can do that while you're at it. Use a sepia for the dead ones. Be careful if you're using some of the darker browns or strong greens, because you really will need to dilute them. If you put snakebite on something, it's just going to be snakebite for life. Might be flat snakebite as well. All right, that's it. So obviously we went with a particular style of kind of jungly basing, but you can do this for anything. If you have any questions whatsoever about how to achieve a certain basing scheme, basing products, whatever it is that would come to mind, how to make sure that your bases are resilient for gaming, which we already have, actually, by the way, that's a very tough base. Anything like that, please let us know below. And if you have any comments or suggestions for future content or criticisms of this that we can improve, let us know those as well. The most liked comment, as normal, below by you guys will receive a texture palette of their choosing and a set of their choosing. So make sure you go down below and vote, even if you don't have anything to add. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, please comment, please subscribe. We'll catch you in the next video.